Hi, and welcome to our SIG working meeting. I think we probably had a working meeting on every WOLFcon until now, and we just had to resolve some issues on the Zoom room. But I think we are now set. We don't have any participants yet, but the mic is on, and Laura is trying to monitor chat for now, and we'll see if anybody is joining. Just to remind everyone, this is a working meeting, so I and Laura don't have anything prepared as far as any presentation is concerned, but we thought it would be good to maybe continue a topic that has been brought up yesterday at the pre-conference workshop on linked data foundations that was led by Laura and Chris, right? And it was like divided or split into three parts. The first was a presentation on the findings and thinkings of the National Library of Sweden. That was Andreas May, who also was one of the panelists today. He presented what they've learned so far from trying to have lead this. So the Union Catalog they are hosting for the Swedish libraries. Connected to Folio and the findings and their vision and how they want to pursue this vision. And then second part was Lisa. You hear Lisa McCall presenting on their libraries findings, and it was more focused on what is meant to have MAR and then transition to linked open data. And the third one was like a panel discussion with Tiziana and Gloria and having Zenobia and Jake Rickett presented, and it was a discussion with questions from the audience. And what we took from, or I took as notes from there, is that there are potential changes to inventory. So now coming back to our traditional metadata management scope and role here, to better support those non-marked metadata. And also it was like a broader question about the role of inventory that we've been discussing every now and then again from the earliest beginnings until now. I've also created this wiki page, so you can find it at the usual place at our SIG meeting minutes. So we can try to use that place to collect, gather discussion and the outcomes and maybe potential next steps. So how we should continue here. And it's good. We have a lot of known faces here to discuss. So maybe we could start by looking at some key findings, at least what I thought, and I've noted down, then you can add to that, and then we can start discussing, and Laura, straight to the helping here. There are some bullet points I here noted down. So maybe we should try with good outcomes. That would be the second one. National Library of Sweden has looked at the data model of the instance records, mainly, I would say mainly at the instance records here, and has identified that it fits their needs. So what they need, what they like to map into the instance record, but they also have identified some gaps. Some of them listed here. So they would like to record more statistical data that they need for analysis. They had also the notion that they can't distinguish multiple languages, for instance, so have it machine readable to identify that this is a translation or this is the original language. They also talked about the granularity for the year of publication. But at least that is an area where we are working on with those machine readable start and end date, or it's now called year 1 and year 2. So it's even agnostic. It doesn't have to be start and end, but in most cases it will be start and end date for series and journals.
And they also talked about that they would like to have a better ability to identify records needed for certain operations. So I think that could be like, here's some property and please perform a bulk edit operation for all records that match this criteria. We also shortly touched on the instance metadata source, because now we have basically two sources. We have MARC. If there is that means that there is a underlying record in SRS, and we have Folio, which basically means we just have instance records, instance and holdings records, and there isn't a source on item level for now. And that reminded me of a document I created back in 2020. Could pull it up. I think we've also discussed it in the SIG, because what I heard yesterday was pretty much like that. So currently we have Folio and MARC. And what I thought would make sense is also not only to record the maybe provenance of a record, but also the underlying metadata standard or format. So that would be we have like a property called data source, and then one called source format. So that would allow us to,
So one of the things that I think has been a struggle is sometimes these kind of controlled vocabularies end up being defined in code rather than defined as data. And I think that's very challenging, particularly, well, like say for international libraries, where controlled vocabularies are included in English. And so, you know, one of the things that I think we should think about possibly is whether there would be some way to manage this notion of the record source outside of the code as some kind of reference data or default data, so that it could be easily updated, possibly even by the library. Like the library could say, you know, I have this source that other people don't have of records that I need to distinguish in some. That's just good thoughts.
Huge thumbs up. So I'm thinking that, can I just clarify, you're basically saying that we need to stop using data to manage this, and we need to use reference data?
Well, not so much string data as managing it in code, right? So for right now, if we want to add, if we decide, right, like if the linked data application wants to say, well, I want some different kind of data source, then it ripples through 4 or 5 different code bases, right, to fix, right, to say, I want to add linked data as a data source. I have to update the inventory UI, I have to update the inventory business module, I have to update the inventory storage module, I have to update the schema for the instance in at least 2 different places. You know, so there's a lot of code, and that makes the barrier for adding things very high, and the flexibility very low.
And having that in the code doesn't give us any benefit.
Well, I mean, you could imagine that it could give you some benefit, because you would say have different actions if you were to edit. Right, like that might be code driven, but it could also be configuration driven.
Right.
And so anyway, that's just I would just like to make a plug for making that data rather than.
And what I think I'm seeing you suggesting here is what I'm seeing we need. We have one code and we're trying to convey 2 different types of information in one code, and that never works well. So I think we need another, I think you're saying it like data source and source format. So we need some to be able to say this came from Sinopia, or it came from OCLC, or it came from our local, it came from our spreadsheet. And then somewhere else to say, and its original format was.
Yeah. Or it came from vendor A, vendor B, vendor C, because source systems, always all have MARC right now, but in the future you could envision yeah, Libris not, because they are converting to Mark, but their original source would be this JSON-LT linked data representation. Yeah.
So
And-
one thing we could do today is if we can agree whether this is something we want to propose a change. So basically adding an element to the administrative metadata. And we could agree to write up a story for that. If people think it's worthwhile.
And Michael, I see your hand. Just to remind everyone, that hasn't been touched in 4 years. So
Yeah.
that is just, I looked it up and put it here in
Yeah.
the notes. Yeah.
So if we add a new field to administrative data, how are we going to handle the historical data, the data that is already in the system? How are we going to populate them?
Well, we'd have to think about the various ways that people could either, I mean, in some cases, like the catalog date, we know that if something was cataloged before we migrated, the catalog date isn't populated and we just know that. And that's one option. And then,
But would that be required field or?
oh, these are all things we're going to need to talk through. If we agree this is the direction we want to go.
But we have an old, probably also from 2020, a feature about how to better support when data is coming from the union catalog. And channels actually also raised that, and GBV also, because your data is coming from the CBS catalog, and you want to include it, have these records not identified with mark or polio, but K10 plus.
And we made the deliberate choice to not write the format like Pika. It would be Pika in our case. That's like a mark, a standard or format, but we choose to populate it with the actual source. So that is the name of our union catalog, like Libris, because it's only provided in one format. So we have different export formats, but the source of our mapping is in Pika plus format like Mark 21.
But all the underlying, actions we want to have these new data, suggested data properties to support. Speaks for that it should be backported also for channels,
Yes.
and otherwise they will have all their collection where they are not able to, use that. Now they can identify that their data is coming from this.
Would that be something that is run during a migration from one folio version to another? So that, let's say we have this data property implemented as we then agreed how it should work, maybe even non-mandatory. But during migration, you could have like a fixed value that is being set. So like say, if the source right now is marked, then this new property,
I mean, so.
I'm looking at Wayne the whole time.
Oh, I was the jury. But, the issue is that anytime you propose something like that, you are, adding to the complexity of the upgrade. And in particular, when you're talking about updating, I mean, it's one thing to say, let's update the funds, because there are maybe, a few dozen funds. It's another thing to say, let's update all of the instances, every instance record. That will add to the time of the upgrade. It will add to downtime that's required for your library. It could be done, and it has been done on in a number of instances, but it's right, it's a big lift for the developers to figure out, I think, and Margaret, you can see this better.
I agree with everything for this.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big lift for the developer to figure out how to do it in a way that doesn't impact operations, so that you have 8 hours of downtime in order to populate this here, so.
But that may be a price that they need to pay, right?
Right.
At some point.
I kind of want to start with, I mean, I think this is a good idea, but does the community, is there enough support in the community for us to write up the associated stories? And that's something maybe we could vote on in Slack.
So I think the idea is good. It starts getting me a little worried now when you start talking about vendor A, vendor B, vendor C. It could become a very, very long list of things.
Well, and we wouldn't have to configure it that way, just like we do our statistical.
I think it's something we need to discuss, the scope of these things and maybe some of them you can implement locally or something.
Right, that, I'm assuming they would, there might be a small set of defaults that could be deleted, and it'd be like the statistical codes. So we use statistical codes right now for vendors, and it is a very long list, but I could see us wanting to have the format, the source just be vendor. And you
But
might.
I do think it is also just worth asking the question of, hey, we have 5 data editors potentially linking to Folio, one sort or another. How much do we really need to say that it's from Sinopia versus from Marva or whatever as well, you know, or could we just be saying it's different? And
That's another question.
And that could, sorry, I'm jumping, but if we had it in settings where you define, when I say use, view source for a bit frame formatted record, then my institution means Sinopia, or my institution means the new early data app, for my institution then jQuery. So we could build that into a settings view.
I think it falls back to the question of what would having this new property and the values enable us to do. So like yesterday it was mentioned that right now we have this action menu on the instance, and we can view the source and we can edit the mark in quick mark, and having like another app like the Mava app. How would Mava know to open the Mava app when looking at the instance? So maybe we need like a predefined, so that is, I think, what you meant with hard coded or written in the code.
Right, well, I mean, you could, so, I mean, I'm not a UI developer, but the UI does have this notion of plugins that you can configure a preferred plugin for a particular action. And so I can imagine some way in settings of saying, you know, I'm going to define this data source, I'm going to call it LD Marva. I'm gonna create this source, and I'm gonna call it LD Marva. And my preferred plugin for managing LD Marva is the one that launches the Marva editor. And you know, I'm gonna define another one that's like LD SVD or SVD or ShareVD. And my preferred plugin for that would launch jQuery. And then I could actually have records from both sources, you know, that would, because, you know, maybe I have a reason to do it that way. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's too much flexibility, but.
we were talking about that.
Yeah.
Well, and somebody asked yesterday, and I made a note that this comes back to what is the purpose of this view source? Why are we using that? And it sounds like we should write up use cases. Surprise, surprise. We're having two different elements.
Yeah, one is being to be able to print a record. That was, I think it was added. That's quite new.
Well, there's also, I can see if you have source data that is an external system wanting to be able to view the source data, but not necessarily edit it. So I think that there is a use case for having two separate actions, whether they need to be completely separate or in the way that they are now. I don't know. So I know that they're now adding the edit option to the view screen.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know we use the source view, in part just somebody who's used to parsing mark can look at it more quickly, but there's also data in the source record that isn't necessarily matched to the instance, so sometimes we need to look at that.
Not everybody might have permission to edit a record, but
Not everybody,
look at it.
right? Plus the edit view for mark isn't as easy to parse as the view source.
Yeah, but we don't want to put too much weight on these one words to do like 60 different things. So,
Yeah, so I really like the idea. I know we've been discussing this for a number of years. I'm wondering about kind of the cross-app functionality. You know, there's data import, there's small edit, there's this stuff, but also things like maybe orders where you can create like, the orders can create a folio record. So how would that interact with kind of the changes here? And I'm not sure how, but I'm just kind of putting that question out there. You know, maybe it won't, or maybe it will, I don't know. Is that something that we need to look at, you know, and make sure that's there?
Anytime we add something, we need to think about how it affects import and export and, you know, process communication.
What I'm hearing is that there is agreement that we should at least pursue this new field, maybe in the SIG, and try to work out the specifics here. And I think that would be at least a good outcome for now.
Yeah. And then maybe as we discuss other potential changes to inventory, thinking about what our priorities are. So I was also very interested. There were two other things. That one was the languages, the fact that you can have multiple languages represented in the instance, but they're all just language. So in the source record may have said, this is the English translation and the original was German, or it might be saying, this is the English translation and it includes the original German. Or it might be saying, this is in English, but the subtitles are in these three languages. And right now, Folio just says, these are all the languages. And I know when I've been doing reporting based on the language in the instance, it really screws things up when I'm trying to say, how many things did we catalog in Japanese? But I realized half of what I pulled up were actually Chinese translations from Japanese.
Here is, at least for me, here begins like this border, this thin thread of how much data do we want, or how many detail of data do we want to have in the instance.
Yep.
Yeah, I know Folio is right now built to use inventory to do such queries and reporting.
We can query the source record too.
Yeah. Is there a UI or do you?
No, I should say, if we're using LTP, we have marked.
No,
or
but,
APIs.
yeah, there is a.
Okay.
But I think that's a limitation. So like I work in a consortium and, you know, it's been made clear that if you're not a systems librarian, you do not use the API. It is not for, it's only for systems people. So that leaves us with nothing basically, because there is no UI search for marked data. So we do have LD but I think there's others in our case where, you know, the API, maybe they don't have the skills or they don't have access to it. And I think that's something we really need to fix, because it's not everything is mapped in the instance. And, you know, for example, finding things that are slated as government documents that are university presses that display as GovDocs in our discovery, we can't search for those in inventory.
Now, Jennifer, do you know if there is any feature in to add a UI search for Mark?
Well, there's mark authorities. I think can you search mark authorities? I can't remember.
Thank you.
And I don't know why it was never done for mark in records. There, I don't know, maybe there's one mark.
There is an API,
Yeah,
but it was created by Colonel, many years ago, and it's functioning very well. There is, as you know, there's no UI, and I don't think there was even ever request to create a UI for this tool.
I think
So
that
maybe
pushes
this is
back
something
against the idea of a mark. As a UI for mark search, because I was really hoping not to put our development efforts into mark. But that does, I think this raises a bigger question, which relates to the other thing that came up yesterday, which was the idea of having a place to store URIs. associated with various elements in the instance data. And sure, right now we could slap a URI in that text string that is the author name, but that's not going to actually help. And so the overarching question though is that what do we want inventory to do and be able to do? How much do we want in inventory versus how much do we want not to be in inventory? And how much do we need to put there in order to support all of our potential workflows without putting things in inventory that we're really going to be managing elsewhere? So do we have an operational need to manage URIs in inventory? I don't have the answer. I feel like that's a pretty big question we need to answer.
It was like the dream of codex, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you know, and without that, I mean, inventory, you know, everyone's kind of using inventory. And we each have very different ways of searching inventory. So if you're doing like circulation, inventory is just very, very difficult to use. You can't see what's on order, if it has a request, unless you're clicking, you know, down, 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 down. And they want that information front and center.
Yeah.
You know, where the catalogers want, you know, more of, you know, the data from the bibliographic record, you know, up center. And you can't really do all of it. So I'm kind of, I mean, for me, inventory is trying to be all things, and it's failing at everything. And so I don't know what the answer is, but Philip, actually, Charlotte shared this on Slack a couple weeks ago. Philip designed, like, you know, I guess it looks like almond outfit. Anyway.
No, Alma looks like.
Yeah. And it was wonderful because you could really see, like, you know, how many holdings you had and, you know, what was connected to, you know, either the instance holdings and item. And I think we do need that, maybe more so than discovering, you know, obscure MARC data. Because, yeah, I'm not a big fan of MARC. I wish we just went to JSON. But anyway, why do we have source record storage? Yeah, okay.
What do you think, Jennifer?
Well, I think we're here to connect and
I would say there is actually a lot of obscure data people do have to search, unfortunately, not necessarily in MARC, because there will be obscure data in BigQuery as well.
Yeah.
MARC is not unique in having obscure data. But the one thing we were also talking about in relation to this yesterday is, you know, the operational record aspect, which was the original sort of conception of one of the original conceptions, at least of inventory, versus the fact that people have to do intensive searching in inventory. And that those two things by themselves are incompatible. You know, I think that's something we just need to talk about right there, is that incompatibility aspect.
It seems like inventory itself has become like the behemoth now.
Yeah, well, it's becoming Mark II in sort of
Yeah.
way.
And wasn't it mentioned yesterday that there are needs, and I hear it from Jennifer as well, that there are needs to have like multiple inventories or different views on data, living in inventory. So if I'm circulation staff, I'm interested in item status maybe, and catalogers are more interested in like a statistical code. Has this been cataloged, or is this just a brief record that has to be completed, or anything like that? But when you had your hand.
Well, I just wanted to circle back a little bit to the question of whether URIs need to be managed in inventory. And I think the thought that I had was, I don't know that inventory is the tool for managing URIs, but I do think that for the purposes of distinguishing between two words, the identifier of the contributor it could be a very important piece of data that should be available rather than just the string, right? Because right now all we have is the string.
I think so too, and even if it's possible to have a folio only record. And it should be possible to have a place to put an identifier.
Right, I mean, and it's critical for linked data applications
Yeah.
in general. But it's also important for things like reporting, right? To say, you know, this contributor is the same as that contributor, that therefore I have these holdings that are, you know, have the same contributor. I would think that, so it's not necessarily like, I don't want to be entering a bunch of URIs into inventory. I don't want to be managing and correcting my URI.
But if they're in the source data, we should have a place for them to be in the instance.
Our big part of URIs is, sort of more administrative kind of URIs. If the data you're bringing in is converted, say, from marked to bitframe or whatever, you're gonna have something that says what kind of conversion, you know, the conversion, that also has URI in it.
Yeah.
I mean, it would generally be a note, but if you really would like that URI to be live. And
And there should be
even
a place to put that in the
even if-
administrative data.
in folio, you probably still need the equivalent of the mark 758, which says it's an instance of this, you know, or whatever to connect and that kind of thing. You know, we were trying to do that and it's like, well, the only place we can put a live URI turns out it's in, you know, in our catalog and it's something to click on. It's
Right.
not exactly what we wanted.
So I guess my question is, in a world where we have these additional sources of linked data besides just Mark, would the like keeping URIs in inventory then be the only way that we could search for like a particular URI, like regardless of where it came from? Because that seems.
That does seem important.
Well, and I guess for the question that Andreas was asking yesterday about where does caching?
Yes.
Right, which is it's not a solved problem.
Luckily, metadata management may not have to decide that.
I'm wondering, is the bid record the only place where you use identifiers without the hundreds of items? I mean, and I think this is maybe where inventory might, you know, I don't know, it's not helpful because you can search for item and holdings data, but you always get instances, which is not what we want to look at sometimes. We want to look at different records. And, you know, this is, I think, an architecture problem, but for me, it's a problem. But will this affect, you know, linked data? I mean, if you want to search, you know, these URIs at the holdings or items level, but for only those that search your, you know, that fit within your search criteria, will you be able to find them?
I think the way the multi-column lists are displaying the search results right now, we need to consider that as a sustainable threat, because that has never been the idea. So we shouldn't try to, you know, solve, you know, real scenarios based on how it is displayed in the result list with a very poor presentation. So maybe I think we should try to distinguish these two conversations and solve the display of the search result as one scope, and then defining what makes data in the instance schema we want with another scope.
So Nancy's here, then you can see her.
Just talking about item data, this is something Laura and I have talked about a lot. Because of course, in Mark, we put a lot of item data in what would be the equivalent of the instance. And in linked data, that doesn't really work very well. And it really should be in the item record. Which, oh yeah, it also could have contributors that are only contributors to the item, like a bookbinder or something like that. So that's something to think about too.
I would like to circle back to the necessity to have a URI. And in addition on this case, that is very important in case we are thinking that folio is not the only tool that the library will use. So with external tools and external metadata tools, having just a URI for a name, for example, for a title is crucial to simplify the back and forth data flow. Because in case you are using an external tool and you change something, having a URI, you can just update a part of the tool and vice versa. If I'm using an external authority source for names, for example, and I change a name in inventory, it's useful to have a URI to send just the brief update and not extract everything. So it's probably simpler addition, I don't know how simple to have a URI for each piece of information, but very, very useful to simplify the delta and updating processing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that having the URIs in inventory is really important, as is being able to, include obscure data from other sources in the search. I'm very concerned about, I think that my concern about like the MARC search UI was that we already have these siloed searches and they're not very useful. And having yet another siloed search, I think would be problematic. And then thinking about the URIs and, I didn't even consider like having URIs and being able to search on them and how powerful that would actually be for some of our management work. But we can't search the URIs in our electronic access blocks from inventory right now, because the data set is just too large. It's not supported via the all inventory search. So, I mean, if we're going to exponentially increase the amount of data that would populate that, I mean, that's a problem. That's a real problem that needs to be solved. And I think that, I think it's important that we solve it.
Yeah, but that's someone else's problem.
But it's our problem because we need to get rid of it.
And often it bounces back to MM because then, and that's a good thing because we are then discussing, yeah, we have this field and there could be potentially this value. How would you like it to, how would you like the search to function? And then it's going back and we have to consider every potential value that could be in it and yeah, how to parse it.
At some point, probably after this week, I'm gonna ask people to think about all the things we're talking about. What's higher priority or what needs to be done before something? And that comes back to when we're our challenges with search and search results. Well, do we address the search and the results display first, or ideally we do everything all at once, but we know that's not going to happen.
So is it useful to talk about timelines too? There's a very short turnaround from ransoms to Sunflower, right? And that backlog is pretty full.
Yep.
As is, from stuff that has already been talked about pretty extensively. You have to decide, is this important enough to cut in line?
Yeah.
Right? Is it more important than something else as people have been talking about in forums like this for a while? Or is it something that may need to like look ahead to trilling?
I'm always thinking the things like this and looking ahead.
Yeah.
Because there are things we still can't reorder our item records. That's also really important.
Is there a way to see that view of everything that had been prioritized? Where does that fit in that list of priorities? Right?
Yep.
And from I'm sorry, one last thing, apologies. From the discussion yesterday in this, is linked data, because of the emergence of these editors, does that put some weight onto something about what would be a quick win? Right, not solving something, but demonstrating that, anticipating that we're going to have this in 2025? Is there something small that we can do along the lines of the same? That's it.
Just the conversation about the URIs, beyond passing it back and forth from these different data editors and the importance of the work IDs for, to ensure that I don't know, in the interim, in this hybrid environment, what's going to feed into our discovery. And so if we can take advantage of, leaky folio at this point, like folio records, dumping into our solar index along with our mark records, which may or may not have, because we're doing this exchange, then that would be a value, to discovery, could be potentially to have those in the inventory. But then again, that's setting up inventory to be something that I feel like maybe goes beyond the scope of what people think of it as, but it's not really inventory as much as the storage of the folio record. I don't know if that's the same, the distinction. I know that you just kind of turn on folio.
Yeah, I feel like we did a lot of work early on creating a roadmap for inventory, and I don't know that that's been really maintained. And I don't know that in the project level roadmap that we have the granularity that we need. And we've been waiting on functionality for a very long time. And, like you were saying, Felix, it's been 4 years since, we touched that.
I haven't pushed it, so.
Yeah. I guess just wondering whether this needs to be part of a broader initiative, just to revisit the vision of inventory, what's working and what's not working. And is our vision for inventory the same? Are our proposals from 4 years ago or 6 years ago? I mean, if they're still in the backlog, should we be having those discussions before we, move forward with that? What do we know now that we didn't know then? Where are we now? And just thinking about rethinking or revisiting inventory vision and creating a roadmap for where inventory needs to be.
So like a community roadmap.
Yeah.
In other ends of the project, for your project, then the recap work is also happening with bundling, so the apps and the module platform harmonization, bundling things. So, and here, the message has been, we are not touching inventory, even that it was called this huge and, everybody got uncomfortable about that. Inventory included quick mark work, source record storage, authority control data, etc., all of this. And, it's, then people cannot touch it right now, because then it will simply blow out the steam of all libraries who is live right now. So, but of course, so the timing is excellent, but we are not having a ton of time if we want to, have a say on this. Because Eureka is happening as we should.
So I think updating the roadmap could offer a few things. First of all, it would be something we can show the product council that shows that we've thought this through. I think, obviously for us, it would be really good for setting our own priorities and, also thinking what order things have to go in. Like say maybe that the thing with the source code thing that might have to go before everything works, even though it doesn't affect people very much. But also I think, other groups might look at our roadmap somewhere and actually find something they're in sync with you in, and you can actually get together with them and push something like that. And also get rid of all the stuff you don't want to do.
I'm remembering years ago, we had some long virtual working meetings. And I feel like this is not a topic for a 1 hour SIG meeting.
Yeah.
No.
So you were then presenting the results, right? That was the scope of inventory group, or are you talking about the roadmap?
Oh, I'm thinking, well, back in the day, we had these long working meetings focusing on various things, like hashing out what does format type and content type even mean, but I'm thinking something similar for first, what is the vision of inventory, and then maybe second, what's the roadmap, what are our priorities, but are also what are logical orders things need to happen in.
And we have documents to start.
We do, so maybe we start with like consolidating and updating the documents, but also planning. I'm happy to help. I realize I'm not convening anymore, but I'm happy to help plan.
You're more than welcome. And now we have all the experiences from libraries being live. So back in like 2020, Chicago wasn't live. I think Connor, you just went live, or in 2020?
Oh, and I'm thinking even before, I'm thinking like 2018, maybe, we were having these like 3-4 hours, maybe they were 2 hours. They seemed like 4 hours. They were long working meetings.
So I'm just wondering back here, we had the thing yesterday.
Yeah.
Seems to me that one way of trying to sell the idea that it's time to revisit inventory is to like socialize what's happened in the linked data space, right? And say, we think this is a big enough thing to get people's attention to learn about it, number one. And two, is that it's a good reason for us to try to revisit the overall roadmap. Right? It seems to me that there are other folks who are deep into whatever they're into, and it may need some kind of primer on linked data. But at the root, and you've said this many times, Lauren, and you've brought it up, Nancy, is, this is at the root of inventory, right? This is what we were supposed to do. Would that be useful to have some kind of form to make it more available? And use this as the head of the spear, if you will, for change. What do you think of that?
I think among MM, we have no need to explain the urgency, but I think that's a really great strategy for communicating to the broader community. Yeah.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
We should never forget the product council. But I totally agree with you, though, that it would be good to have a strong, that it's not just because we felt like, but there's a reason.
We're not just special.
Right, super special.
I think some of the things Jennifer was talking about as well are sort of opportunities for us to rethink, right? The notion that inventory isn't serving resource excellence. Right, like people who are involved in circulation and that, I mean, right, this room has mostly metadata.
Circulation matters.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe, and part of the impetus is just simply that, like, there's only so much you can know before you have 165 libraries in production. Right, and now we have 165 libraries in production, we've learned some things, we should probably, take advantage of that experience.
Well, yeah, and that's circulation aspect and the acquisition people.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that we all use inventory though, is that we do have to get, if there are any major changes in inventory, we gotta get some buy-in.
Yeah.
Or at least understanding, or they might gang up against it, no. Those are people who can really hear stuff.
But this might have been a question for yesterday, but Doug, I'm realizing, I don't know that I've heard from your point of view what you think is missing because you've done so much work with a lot of Congress, what's missing from it, what you wish, what you wish was there or not there, let's start with you.
Oh, I mean, it's just one, but what I see, and I reinforced or seconded what Charlotte was talking about, was we need to build it in such a way that it's not, you know, the Folio link data editor or jQuery or something. We want to build an ecosystem, real ecosystem. That's like super, super important, because if we are in a position where the libraries have choices, and they can make multiple decisions, they don't have to choose one, right? They can use multiple applications. Now it becomes more robust, and that drives change too. Rather than, you know, well, I need this, that's fine, but you wouldn't do it just because, you know, one person said it was important to me. More important is demonstrating that Folio is robust and it can anticipate where it needs to be. That's where I would go.
Maybe we should end with that.
Yeah.
Really,
Because right after the lunch is presentation by the Folio roadmap.
Yep.
Working group.
Oh, yeah.
And if we don't have a roadmap, up-to-date roadmap, we have to present that working group sometime, I think.
Yeah.
And we get what we deserve.
Right.
So thank you all for attending. Thanks, Christy and Laura, for taking notes, and yeah, been so present here.